I woke up on the cold marble floor of St. Catherine's Cathedral, my cheek pressed against stone that smelled of lemon polish and centuries of prayers. The overhead lights had been turned off, leaving only the flickering votives near the altar to cast dancing shadows across the empty pews. My phone was dead, my stomach cramped with hunger, and I was utterly, devastatingly alone. Again. Except this time I remembered. I remembered everything. The pneumonia that would kill me in 3 weeks if I didn't change course. The funeral where my mother cried, not for me, but because people were watching. The will reading where my sister Emma inherited everything, including the trust fund my grandmother had specifically designated for my education. I remembered dying at 23 in a county hospital, alone, with my last words whispered to a nurse who didn't know my name. I was 16 again, and I was done being the family ghost. My hands shook as I pushed myself up from the floor. Through the stained glass windows, I could see the parking lot was empty except for Father Michael's ancient sedan. Everyone was gone. My family had attended the 11 o'clock service, sat in our usual pew, third from the front on the right, and when it ended, they'd simply walked out. Without me. Again. In my first life, I'd waited for 2 hours before Father Michael found me during his evening rounds. He'd driven me home to find the house locked, the lights off, and my family enjoying dinner at Romano's without me. When I'd called my mother's cell phone, breathless and panicking, she'd sighed like I was an inconvenience and said, "Oh, Lily, we thought you'd gotten a ride with the Hendersons. Stop being so dramatic. There's leftover casserole in the fridge." There was never any casserole. But this time, I had something they didn't know about. This time, I had foreknowledge. Every cruel trick, every calculated humiliation, every theft and betrayal. I remembered it all with perfect clarity. And I was going to use that knowledge to burn their pretty little world to the ground. I found Father Michael in his office, hunched over a computer, working on next Sunday's bulletin. He looked up when I knocked, his weathered face creasing with concern. "Lily? I thought everyone had gone home." "They forgot me," I said simply. The words came easier this time, without the desperate shame that had colored them before. "Could you give me a ride?" The sympathy in his eyes was genuine, which made what I was about to do easier. Father Michael was a good man. He deserved to know the truth about the family who smiled so piously in his pews every Sunday. He drove me home in comfortable silence, and when we pulled into the driveway of our large colonial house, paid for by my father's medical practice, I could see every light blazing. Through the living room window, I watched my mother, Margaret, gesturing animatedly while my father, Dr. Richard Ashford, nodded along, my sister. Emma lounged on the sofa, scrolling through her phone with the casual entitlement of someone who'd never wanted for anything. "Would you like me to walk you in?" Father Michael asked gently. "No," I said, then reconsidered. "Actually, yes, I think you should see something." I rang the doorbell. In my first life, I'd used my key, crept in through the side door, and gone straight to my room to avoid confrontation. Not this time. My mother answered, her smile freezing when she saw Father Michael behind me. "Oh, Father, what a surprise. Is something wrong?" "Mrs. Ashford," he said carefully, "I found Lily at the church. She'd been there since the service ended. 3 hours ago." I watched my mother's face perform a masterclass in calculated emotion. Shock, then concern, then a perfectly calibrated confusion. "What?" "But Lily, you said you were getting a ride with the Peterson girl. We waited for you in the parking lot for 10 minutes. Lies flowed from her like water. In my first life, I'd been too shocked and hurt to contradict her. I'd actually started to doubt my own memory, wondering if I had mentioned the Petersons. "I was in the bathroom," I said clearly, looking not at my mother but at Father Michael. "When I came out, you were all gone. I checked the parking lot. I called Mom's phone twice. It went straight to voicemail." My mother's laugh was practiced silk. "Lily, honey, you never called." I pulled out my phone. The one they'd given me. A cheap prepaid model that Emma had thrown in my face after I'd admired her new iPhone 12. "It's dead now, but the call log will show it once it's charged." Father Michael's expression shifted slightly. He'd been a priest for 30 years. He knew when someone was lying. Perhaps there was a misunderstanding, he said diplomatically, but his tone had cooled. I'll leave you folks to sort it out. Lily, if you ever need anything, you know where to find me. After he left, the mask dropped. My mother's face twisted into something ugly and familiar. What the hell was that, Lily? Making us look bad in front of the priest? You left me there, I said. Oh, please. Emma finally looked up from her phone, her pretty face, so like our mother's, arranged in a sneer. You're 16 years old, not 6. You could have called an Uber. With what money? Maybe if you got a job instead of mooching off mom and dad? Emma, that's enough, my father said. But there was no real force behind it. He never stood up for me. Not when it mattered. In my first life, he'd watched silently as my mother and sister systematically destroyed me, offering only token protests that died the moment they were challenged. I looked at him now, this man who shared my DNA but had never really seen me, and felt nothing but cold determination. I'm going to my room, I announced. Don't you want dinner? My mother called after me, all sweetness again. We brought you back a doggy bag from Romano's, the same restaurant where, in my first life, they'd celebrated Emma's mediocre report card with champagne, while my straight-A transcript sat ignored on the counter. I didn't bother responding. My room was exactly as I remembered it. Small, tucked away in the back corner of the second floor, furnished with hand-me-downs and whatever hadn't fit in Emma's much larger bedroom. The walls were bare because my mother said picture frames cluttered the space. My bookshelf held my few precious possessions. My grandmother's books mostly, inherited before she died when I was 12. Before they'd convinced me she'd left me nothing. That was another lie I'd discovered too late in my first life. Grandma Rose had left me a trust fund worth nearly $500,000, meant to be released when I turned 18. But my parents were the trustees, and they'd simply never told me it existed. By the time I'd found out, 3 years after her death, through a chance conversation with her lawyer at a coffee shop, my mother had already drained most of it for estate management fees and investment opportunities that had somehow all gone to Emma's benefit. The lawyer had been sympathetic but clear. Without proof of malicious intent, there was nothing to be done. My parents had acted within their legal rights as trustees. The fact that they'd spent my inheritance on my sister's car, her designer clothes, her spring break trips to Cabo, that was just bad luck for me. I plugged in my phone and waited for it to charge. While I did, I opened the false bottom of my grandmother's jewelry box, the one secret I'd managed to keep from Emma's sticky fingers. Inside was $200 in carefully saved bills, money I'd earned babysitting and hidden away for emergencies. In my first life, I'd never gotten to use it. Emma had found it 3 days before I'd gotten sick, taken it to buy a new handbag, and told me I'd probably just lost it. This time, I folded the bills carefully and tucked them into my bra. Then I sat down at my desk, a wobbly card table my father had pulled from the basement, and began to plan. The thing about living life twice is that you become very, very good at seeing patterns. I understood now how my family operated, the ecosystem of cruelty they'd built where I was the designated scapegoat. My mother, Margaret, was the architect. She'd never wanted 2 children. Emma had been the golden child from birth. Beautiful, charming, easy. I'd been the surprise baby, born when Margaret was 42 and thought she was done with motherhood. She'd resented me from the start, not openly, never openly. Margaret was far too concerned with appearances, but in 1,000 small ways, she'd let me know I was unwanted. The way she'd sigh when I entered a room, the way she'd forget to pack my lunch, the way she'd schedule Emma's activities and simply not tell me when we were leaving, forcing me to scramble or be left behind. My father had checked out entirely. Dr. Richard Ashford was married to his practice and his reputation. He'd provided money, a nice house, the trappings of a good life. That was his contribution to fatherhood. The rest, the actual parenting, he'd delegated to Margaret, who'd wielded that power like a weapon. And Emma? Emma had learned from the best. By the time I was 10 and she was 14, she'd perfected the art of tormenting me while maintaining plausible deniability. She'd borrow my things and return them broken. She'd invite me to events and then forget to tell me the plans had changed. She'd spread rumors about me at school. Nothing actionable, just whispers that painted me as weird, oversensitive, dramatic. In my first life, it had worked. By high school, I'd been almost completely isolated. I'd stopped trying to make friends because Emma would seduce them away with her charisma and then poison them against me. I'd stopped joining activities because my mother would forget to drive me, leaving me stranded. I'd stopped asking for help because my father would look at me with tired eyes and suggest I was overreacting. I'd made myself small and quiet and invisible, hoping that if I just needed less, they might finally see me. They never did. But I saw them now. I saw them with the clarity of death and rebirth, and I knew exactly what was coming. In 3 days, Emma would accidentally spill red wine all over my homework, a major research project worth 30% of my grade. In a week, my mother would throw away my college application materials, claiming she thought they were old papers. In 2 weeks, my father would tell me the family couldn't afford to help with college, that I'd need to get scholarships or loans, while simultaneously writing a check for $20,000 toward Emma's sophomore year at a private university where she was barely maintaining a 2.5 GPA. And in 3 weeks, if I didn't change course, I would catch the flu that would turn into pneumonia. I'd ask my mother to take me to the doctor. She'd tell me to stop being dramatic, that it was just a cold. By the time I was coughing up blood, by the time my father finally examined me and realized how serious it would be too late. I would die. And they would cry at my funeral and accept condolences and secretly be relieved that the difficult child, the expensive child, the child who'd never quite fit, was finally gone. Except now I knew the ending, and I was going to rewrite it. My phone buzzed to life. I had 17 missed calls from a number I recognized. Sarah Chen, my guidance counselor. In my first life, those calls had been about my grandmother's trust fund. Sarah had known Grandma Rose, had known about the inheritance, and had been trying to tell me about it. But I'd never checked my messages, and by the time we'd connected, my mother had already looted the account. This time, I called her back immediately. "Lily?" Sarah's voice was warm with relief. "I've been trying to reach you. Do you have a moment to talk about something important?" "Is it about Grandma Rose's trust fund?" The silence on the other end was shocked. "How did you—" "Yes. Yes, it is. Lily, I don't know if your parents told you, but your grandmother left you a substantial educational trust. I think you should contact the executor directly." "Edward Pemberton," I said, naming the lawyer. "I will. Thank you, Sarah." "Lily, is everything okay at home?" The question I'd been too proud, too ashamed to answer honestly in my first life. "No," I said simply. "It's not. But it's going to be." The next morning was Monday. I woke up early, actually early, not the frantic scramble that usually followed my mother forgetting to wake me, and got ready for school with methodical precision. I documented everything. The empty fridge, Emma had eaten the last of the groceries, the lack of lunch money. My mother claimed she'd left $20 on the counter, but I'd watched Emma pocket it the night before, the way no one said goodbye as I walked out the door. I took photos, I started a detailed journal with dates and times, and I called Edward Pemberton from a coffee shop on my walk to school. He remembered me. "Lily Ashford, Rose's granddaughter, I'm so glad to hear from you. I've been wondering if your parents gave you my message." "They didn't tell me about the trust fund at all," I said bluntly. "I found out from my guidance counselor." Another weighted silence. "I see. Lily, I think you should come to my office. There are some things you need to know." I skipped my last 2 periods, calculus and gym, both classes where my absence wouldn't be noted, and took the bus to Pemberton's office in downtown Hartford. He was exactly as I remembered from my first life, elderly, distinguished, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. He laid it out for me in excruciating detail. The trust fund had been worth $500,000 when my grandmother died. It had been intended for my education, college, graduate school, whatever I needed. My parents, as trustees, were required to maintain detailed records of any withdrawals and could only use the money for my direct benefit. They had not maintained records. They had withdrawn nearly $300,000 over 4 years. And when Pemberton had pressed them for documentation, they'd provided vague receipts for educational expenses that wouldn't hold up to any real scrutiny. I should have pushed harder, he said, genuine regret in his voice. But your mother was very convincing. She claimed you were enrolled in expensive tutoring programs, that you had special educational needs. I'm a straight A student, I said flatly. I've never had a tutor in my life. They barely remember to feed me, let alone invest in my education. His face went hard. Lily, what you're describing is neglect. And what your parents have done with your trust fund is potentially criminal. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Do you want to pursue this? In my first life, I'd been so beaten down by the time I'd learned the truth that I'd barely had the energy to fight. I'd consulted a lawyer who'd told me it would be expensive, lengthy, and emotionally devastating to take my parents to court. I'd been sick, I'd been dying, I'd let it go, not this time. Yes, I said, I want every penny back and I want them held accountable. Then we need to act fast before they can hide the money or claim they spent it legitimately. Are you willing to let me petition for an emergency hearing to freeze the trust and remove your parents as trustees? Do it. Pemberton nodded slowly. This is going to get ugly, Lily. They're going to fight back. Are you prepared for that? I thought about the cold church floor, the doggy bag from Romano's, the way my mother's face had looked when she'd told the doctor there was no point in aggressive treatment, that it was just my time. I'm prepared, I said. The legal motion was filed that afternoon. By Connecticut law, because I was a minor alleging financial abuse by my guardians, the case was expedited. A hearing was scheduled for the following week, and per the judge's temporary order, my parents were prohibited from making any further withdrawals from the trust, pending investigation. I didn't tell them. I went home that night and ate the stale cereal I'd hidden in my room and did my homework and acted like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I was a bomb with a lit fuse, and they had no idea. Tuesday came and went. Emma borrowed my favorite sweater, the one nice thing I owned, a cashmere cardigan Grandma Rose had given me for my 15th birthday, and returned it with a cigarette burn on the sleeve. In my first life, I'd cried. This time, I took detailed photos and added them to my evidence folder. Wednesday, my mother forgot to buy groceries again, leaving me to make dinner from a can of beans and some stale crackers. Emma ordered Thai food and ate it in front of me, complaining about how the curry wasn't spicy enough. I documented it all. Thursday, the red wine incident happened exactly as I'd remembered. Emma came into my room while I was working on my research project, a 15-page paper on the ethics of medical resource allocation, complete with citations and graphs, and leaned over my shoulder to see what I was working on. Her wine glass tipped. The burgundy liquid spread across 3 days of work. Oh my God, Lily, I'm so sorry. Emma's performance was Oscar-worthy. The shocked gasp, the fluttering hands, the way she grabbed napkins and made it worse. It was an accident. You know I didn't mean to. In my first life, I'd believed her. I'd spent the night frantically trying to salvage my work, rewriting pages from memory, and I'd still lost 10 points for turning in a water-stained, incomplete project. This time, I'd made backups. 3 of them, including one in my locker at school and one uploaded to a cloud storage account Emma didn't know existed. It's fine, I said calmly, watching her face fall slightly at my lack of reaction. I have copies. Oh, good. She recovered quickly, flashing a smile. See, no harm done. You're so smart, Lily. Always thinking ahead. The compliment was poison wrapped in sugar. I smiled back and said nothing. Friday afternoon, I was called to the principal's office. My mother was there, along with Principal Davies and 2 people I didn't recognize. A woman in a crisp suit who introduced herself as Linda Marshall from Child Protective Services, and a court-appointed advocate named James Torres. My mother's face was a mask of controlled fury. Lily, what have you done? Mrs. Ashford, Linda Marshall said firmly. Please let us handle this. Lily, we're here because there's been a report of financial abuse and neglect in your home. We need to ask you some questions. The next hour was surreal. I answered every question honestly, showing them my documentation, my photos, my journal. I told them about the church, the missing meals, the stolen money, the trust fund. I watched my mother's face cycle through denial, outrage, and finally, fear. "This is ridiculous," she said when I'd finished. "Lily has always been dramatic. Mrs. Ashford, will need to see records of all expenditures from your daughter's trust fund," James Torres said quietly. "And we'll be interviewing other witnesses, including Father Michael from St. Catherine's. If what Lily is saying is true, it's not. Then we're looking at serious charges: financial exploitation of a minor, neglect, possibly fraud." My mother stood abruptly, a swim. "I'm calling our lawyer. And Lily, you're grounded. No phone, no computer, no—" "Mrs. Ashford, you can't punish Lily for cooperating with an investigation," Linda Marshall said. "In fact, I'm going to recommend that she be placed in temporary foster care while we sort this out." The room went silent. I watched my mother's world tilt on its axis. "You can't do that," she whispered. "You can't take my daughter." "I can and I will if I believe she's unsafe in your care. And based on what I've heard today, I have serious concerns." Linda turned to me. "Lily, would you be comfortable going home tonight if we arrange for a social worker to visit tomorrow? Or would you prefer alternative placement?" In my first life, I'd never had this choice. I'd suffered in silence until I died. But now, with the power to change everything, I hesitated. Because leaving, even temporarily, would tip my hand completely. My parents would know I was serious. They'd lawyer up, they'd hide assets, they'd prepare their defense. But staying meant continuing to live in that house, to sit at that table, to pretend everything was fine while building my case. "I'll go home," I said finally. "But I want it on record that I'm afraid, that I don't feel safe." "Noted," Linda said, making a notation in her file. "We'll be in touch, Mrs. Ashford. Don't leave town." The drive home was silent except for my mother's ragged breathing. When we pulled into the driveway, she finally spoke. "How could you, Lily? How could you betray your family like this?" "You left me at church," I said. "You stole my inheritance. You let Emma torment me for years. You were going to let me die." That last part slipped out before I could stop it. My mother's head whipped toward me, her eyes narrow. "What are you talking about?" I couldn't exactly explain that I'd lived this before, that I knew in 3 weeks I'd catch a flu that would kill me because she'd refused to take me to the doctor. So I pivoted. "I'm talking about the 1,000 small ways you've tried to erase me, but I'm done being invisible." I got out of the car and walked into the house. Emma and my father were in the living room, and the moment I entered, Emma launched herself at me. "You bitch! You called CPS on Mom? Do you have any idea what you've done?" My father caught her arm before she could reach me, but his face was cold. "Lily, this is unacceptable. Whatever problems you think you have, we address them as a family. You don't involve outsiders." "We're not a family," I said clearly. "A family doesn't steal from each other. A family doesn't abandon each other. You're just people who share a house and a last name." Emma wrenched free from my father's grip. "God, you're so self-righteous. Do you know how exhausting it is having you around? You're always so sad, so needy, such a victim." "Emma, that's enough," my father said. But again, there was no force behind it. "No, let her finish," I said. "Let her tell me exactly what she thinks of me. Let's get it all out in the open." Emma's beautiful face twisted with genuine hatred. "You want the truth? Fine, Mom never wanted you. You were a mistake, an accident, and everyone knows it. You're just too stupid to take the hint and disappear." The words should have hurt. In my first life, they would have destroyed me. But now, bolstered by foreknowledge and righteous anger, they just felt like proof. Proof that I was right to fight back. Proof that these people didn't deserve my love or loyalty. "Thanks for being honest," I said. "That'll sound great in court." Because I'd been recording. My phone, tucked in my pocket, had been running a voice memo app since we'd left the principal's office. Every word my mother and sister had said was now documented. Emma paled. "You're recording us?" One-party consent state, I said, borrowing the phrase from one of the legal blogs I'd devoured last night. I'm allowed to record any conversation I'm part of without telling you. My father found his voice. Lily, turn off the phone, now. No. The word hung in the air. I'd never refused a direct order from my father before. I'd been too well trained, too afraid of conflict. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I'd died once already. What else could they do to me? Turn off the phone. No, I repeated. And if you try to take it from me, that's theft. If you try to punish me for documenting abuse, that's retaliation. Go ahead, call your lawyer, I'll wait. My father's face went red, then pale. He was a doctor. He understood liability. And he was smart enough to realize, perhaps for the first time, that I wasn't bluffing. Everyone calm down, he said finally. We're all upset. Let's take a breath and discuss this rationally tomorrow. There's nothing to discuss, I said. The hearing is Wednesday. I suggest you find a good attorney. I went to my room and locked the door. My hands were shaking, adrenaline flooding my system. I'd done it. I'd stood up to them, and it felt incredible. That night, I heard them arguing downstairs. My mother's voice was shrill with panic. Emma was crying. My father kept saying lawsuit and reputation and damage control. I lay in bed and listened to their world fall apart, and I didn't feel even a shred of guilt. The weekend was tense. My mother tried alternating between cold silence and sudden bursts of manic cheerfulness, as if she could gaslight me into believing everything was fine. Emma locked herself in her room. My father disappeared to the hospital and didn't come back until late Sunday night. I spent the time preparing. I printed copies of every document. I organized my evidence. I practiced what I would say in court, and I reached out to other people who might testify on my behalf. My teachers, who'd noticed my frequent absences and lack of lunch. My guidance counselor, who'd witnessed my mother's indifference at parent-teacher conferences. Father Michael, who'd found me alone in a locked church. Monday morning, everything exploded. I woke up to find my room trashed. My clothes had been pulled from the closet and thrown on the floor. My bookshelf was overturned. My laptop, the old one I'd bought with babysitting money, was smashed on the ground. Emma stood in the doorway, her face flushed with spite. Oops, I was looking for my sweater and things got out of hand. Behind her, my mother's expression was calculating. She was testing me, seeing if I would break. I pulled out my phone and started filming. Emma Ashford just destroyed my personal property. The laptop cost me $400. The books belong to our grandmother and are irreplaceable. This is vandalism, and it's on camera. Emma's smile faltered. You can't prove. Hi, Emma, I said to the camera. Say hi to the judge. She fled. I surveyed the damage and felt a strange calm settle over me. This was it, the point of no return. They'd escalated, which meant I could escalate right back. I called Linda Marshall. She arrived within the hour, took photos, and informed my parents that I would be moved to foster care immediately. This is what you want? My mother asked me, her voice breaking. To destroy your family? You destroyed it years ago, I said. I'm just making it official. The foster home was in West Hartford, run by a woman named Patricia, who specialized in emergency placements. It was clean, quiet, and safe. I had my own room. Patricia made sure I had 3 meals a day. She drove me to school and asked about my homework and treated me like I mattered. It was the best week of my life. Wednesday came. The hearing was in Hartford Family Court, a gray building that smelled of old coffee and anxiety. Edward Pemberton met me in the lobby along with Linda Marshall and James Torres. We'd prepared extensively, building a case that was less about emotion and more about cold, hard facts. My parents arrived with their lawyer, a shark-faced man named Gerald Harding, who specialized in making problems disappear. Emma was with them, dressed in a sweet sundress that made her look younger and more innocent. The judge was a woman named Eleanor Sharp, and her reputation preceded her. Fair but ruthless with anyone who wasted her time. The hearing lasted 3 hours. Pemberton presented documentation of every withdrawal from my trust fund, highlighting expenses that clearly had nothing to do with my education. Emma's car, Emma's sorority dues, Emma's spring break trips, a kitchen renovation, a timeshare in Florida. Your Honor, my mother's lawyer argued, these expenses benefited the entire family, including Lily. A rising tide lifts all boats. The trust fund was used to maintain a stable home environment. By buying a timeshare in Tampa, Judge Sharp's voice was dry. Counsel, please don't insult my intelligence. Linda Marshall testified about the conditions she'd observed: the lack of food in the house, my mother's hostile attitude, Emma's destruction of my property. She presented the recordings I'd made, including Emma's vicious, "You were a mistake" speech. Father Michael testified about finding me alone in the church and about my mother's immediate lies when confronted. My teachers testified about my frequent absences, my worn clothes, the way I'd sometimes fall asleep in class from hunger. And then I testified. I told the truth in clear, simple sentences. The years of neglect, the stolen inheritance, the systematic cruelty. I didn't embellish. I didn't need to. The facts spoke for themselves. My mother's lawyer tried to paint me as a troubled teen, a manipulative girl who was angry about normal parental discipline. But every time he pushed, I had documentation, dates, times, photos, recordings. Ms. Ashford, Judge Sharp said when I'd finished, you've clearly put considerable thought into this. How old are you? 16, Your Honor. You seem older. Her eyes were shrewd as I. Tell me, what do you want from this hearing? I want my inheritance protected and restored. I want my parents removed as trustees. I want to live somewhere safe. And I want them to be held accountable for what they did. Judge Sharp nodded slowly. Let's take a 15-minute recess. Counsel, I suggest you use this time to discuss a settlement, because if I have to issue a ruling, it's not going to be favorable to the Ashfords. The recess stretched to 30 minutes. Gerald Harding looked increasingly grim as Pemberton laid out our demands: full restitution of the stolen funds, immediate removal of my parents as trustees, court-supervised repayment plan, and a formal apology on record. Your clients have two choices, Pemberton said calmly. Settle now with minimal publicity, or go to trial and face potential criminal charges for financial exploitation of a minor. I have reporters from the Hartford Courant who are very interested in this case. Something about a prominent doctor stealing from his dead mother's estate to fund his golden child's lifestyle. My father's face was gray. My mother looked like she might be sick. Emma was crying, real tears this time, because she'd finally realized that actions had consequences. They settled. The terms were brutal. $275,000 to be repaid to my trust fund within 90 days, with the house put up as collateral. My parents removed as trustees, with Edward Pemberton assuming full control until I turned 25. A formal admission of mismanagement on record. And supervised visitation only, meaning I never had to set foot in their house again if I didn't want to. Judge Sharp made it official. Mr. and Mrs. Ashford, you should be ashamed of yourselves. You stole from your own child. You neglected her basic needs. You allowed your other daughter to abuse her. The only reason I'm not referring this for criminal prosecution is that your daughter has requested mercy. But make no mistake, you've lost her. Whatever relationship you had, you destroyed it. And you did it to yourselves. She turned to me. Ms. Ashford, you're a remarkable young woman. I'm granting your request for foster care placement until you turn 18. At that point, your trust fund will be fully restored and you'll be free to pursue whatever future you choose. I wish you the very best. The gavel came down. It was over. I walked out of that courtroom and into the sunlight, and I felt light as air. Patricia was waiting for me, along with Sarah Chen, who'd taken the afternoon off to be there. How do you feel? Sarah asked. Free, I said. The next 2 years were the best of my life. Patricia's house was more of a home than my family's mansion had ever been. I threw myself into school, into college applications, into building a life that was entirely my own. Without the constant stress of abuse, my grades soared even higher. I joined the debate team, made friends, learned what it felt like to be wanted. My parents made the first payment on schedule, but it cleaned them out. They had to take out a loan against the house, and my father's practice took a hit when word spread about what he'd done. His partners at the medical group quietly suggested it might be time for him to retire early. Emma's college fund dried up. She had to transfer to a state school and get a job waiting tables. She called me once, crying, begging me to ask the judge to reduce the payments. I hung up on her. My mother tried a different approach. She showed up at Patricia's house with flowers and apologies, claiming she'd been under stress, that she'd made mistakes, that she wanted to rebuild our relationship. I told her I'd see her in court-mandated therapy once a month, as specified in the custody agreement. Nothing more. My father sent letters, long, rambling things about how he'd failed me, how he was sorry, how he wanted to make it right. They went straight into a box, unread. Maybe someday I'd open them, but not now, not while the wounds were still fresh. I turned 18 on a Tuesday in March. Patricia took me to Pemberton's office, where he presented me with documentation of my fully restored trust fund, $500,000 plus 2 years of interest. The money my parents had stolen had been repaid in full. "What will you do with it?" Patricia asked as we left the office. "College," I said immediately. "A good one, far from Connecticut, maybe pre-med. I want to be the kind of doctor my father should have been." I was accepted to Stanford with a full academic scholarship. I didn't need my trust fund for tuition, which meant I could use it for other things: a safety net, seed money for investments, the freedom to take unpaid internships and research positions. I graduated summa cum laude. I went to medical school at Johns Hopkins. I specialized in pediatrics because I wanted to be the person who noticed when kids were being hurt at home, who asked the right questions and didn't look away. And I never spoke to my family again. Years later, I was 30, running my own practice, engaged to a wonderful man who thought I hung the moon. I got a Facebook message from Emma. She was 34 now, still beautiful, but with a hardness around her eyes that makeup couldn't hide. The message was long and rambling. She'd had a rough decade, 2 failed marriages, a string of dead-end jobs, a bankruptcy. She'd recently had a daughter, she said, and becoming a mother had made her reflect on her own childhood. She was sorry. She understood now how cruel she'd been. She wanted to make amends. At the end, she asked if I could lend her some money, just a little, just to get back on her feet. I stared at that message for a long time. Part of me, the part that remembered being 16 and desperate for family, wanted to respond, wanted to believe people could change. But I'd learned the hard way that some damage can't be repaired. Some relationships, once broken, stay broken. And that's okay. I blocked her. My mother tried to reach out when I got engaged. She sent a card, cream-colored, expensive, congratulating me and saying she hoped she could attend the wedding, that she'd missed so much of my life and wanted to be part of my future. I threw the card away. My father tried a different approach. He established a scholarship in my grandmother's name at UConn for first-generation college students from abusive homes. He sent me the paperwork, proof that he'd funded it with $50,000 of his retirement savings. It was a good thing to do. It would help kids who needed it, and it didn't change anything between us. I sent him a brief email acknowledging receipt and wishing him well. That was all. On my wedding day, Patricia walked me down the aisle. Sarah Chen was my maid of honor. The people who filled the pews were the family I'd chosen, friends, colleagues, my fiancé's warm and welcoming relatives. There was no one from my blood family, and I didn't miss them. During the reception, Patricia pulled me aside. "Your mother called me yesterday," she said quietly. "She wanted to know if there was any way to contact you. She's sick, Lily. Breast cancer, stage 3. She wanted you to know." I absorbed this information and felt nothing. No sympathy, no satisfaction. Just a distant acknowledgement that the woman who'd given birth to me was mortal, like everyone else. "Thanks for telling me," I said. "But I'm not interested in playing the dutiful daughter for her now. She can face this the same way she made me face everything, alone." Patricia squeezed my hand. "I understand. Just wanted you to know." My mother died 6 months later. I learned about it from an obituary Emma posted on Facebook. The comments were full of people praising Margaret Ashford as a devoted mother, a pillar of the community, a woman taken too soon. I didn't correct them. Let them believe what they wanted. I knew the truth, and that was enough. Emma sent me another message after the funeral. Apparently, my mother had died with significant debt. The medical bills had been crushing, and my father's practice had never recovered from the scandal. They'd lost the house. My father was living in a small apartment, surviving on Social Security. Emma was raising her daughter in a trailer park, working 2 jobs to make ends meet. She wanted to know if I'd help. For old time's sake. For family. I didn't respond. A few years later, my own daughter was born, Rose Margaret, named for my grandmother. She was perfect, with my eyes and her father's smile. As I held her in the hospital, watching my husband coo over her tiny fingers, I made a silent promise. I would never make her feel unwanted. I would never steal from her. I would never let anyone hurt her the way I'd been hurt. She would grow up knowing she was loved, valued, cherished. She would never wake up alone on a cold church floor. On Rose's first birthday, I got a letter. Not a message, not an email, but an actual physical letter, forwarded through Pemberton's office. It was from my father. He was dying, lung cancer, terminal. He had maybe 6 months, and he wanted to meet his granddaughter before he went. I read the letter twice. My husband, David, watched me carefully. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I'm thinking," I said slowly, "Thais, that he had 18 years to be my father. He chose not to, and now he wants something from me, and I don't owe him anything." "You don't," David agreed. But do you want to give it to him anyway? That was the question, wasn't it? Did I want to show mercy to a man who'd shown me none? Did I want my daughter to meet her grandfather, to have that connection, however brief? In my first life, I'd died alone, unmourned and unloved. I'd carried the scars of my family's cruelty to the grave, and those scars had taught me something important. Holding on to anger is exhausting. Resentment is a weight that drags you down. But so is forced forgiveness. Reconciliation for the sake of appearances, letting toxic people back into your life because society says family is forever. "No," I said finally, "I don't want to see him. Rose will never know him, and that's okay. We have plenty of family, real family, chosen family. We don't need him." David nodded, saying, "Then we won't go." I never responded to the letter. My father died 8 months later. I didn't attend the funeral. Emma sent me a bitter message calling me heartless, cruel, everything I'd been called as a child. I deleted it without reading past the first line. Today, I'm 45. My daughter is 13, happy and well-adjusted and growing into someone I'm incredibly proud of. My practice is thriving. My marriage is strong. My life is full of love and purpose and joy. Sometimes, late at night, I think about my first life. The girl who died at 23, alone and unloved in a county hospital. I think about what it took to save her, rebirth, foreknowledge, and the willingness to burn every bridge without looking back. Was it worth it? The loss of my family, whatever twisted version of family we'd been? The years of legal battles and therapy and learning to trust people again? Yes. 1,000 times yes. Because here's what I learned. You don't owe anyone your loyalty just because you share DNA. You don't have to forgive people who aren't sorry. You don't have to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. Sometimes the only way to save yourself is to walk away from the people who are drowning you, even if they're family, especially if they're family. I never sat in their pew again, and I've never been happier. On Rose's 14th birthday, we went to St. Catherine's Cathedral for a special mass. Not my old parish, but a beautiful church in San Francisco where we now lived. As we sat together in the pew, my husband on one side and my daughter on the other, I felt a profound sense of peace. This was family. This was home. Not a building or a bloodline, but a choice, made every day in every moment of love and support and presence. Rose leaned against my shoulder and I wrapped my arm around her, holding tight to the life I'd built from the ashes of the one I'd lost. They left me at church after service. They left me everywhere that mattered. But I found my way home anyway, to a home I'd made myself with people who chose me as fiercely as I chose them, and that made all the difference.